A single mother brought breakfast to a homeless man every single morning for 14 months. She couldn't really afford it. She did it anyway. Then one day, she came home from work, and 2 United States Army officers in full dress uniform were standing at her door. What they told her stopped her cold. Because the quiet old man on that bench wasn't who she thought he was. Not even close. And he had been watching her carefully, deliberately for a very long time. But why? What did he know about her that she didn't know herself? And what had he already set in motion before she ever found out the truth? Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., the same as always. Maya Calloway silenced it before the second buzz, a reflex built over 3 years of not wanting to wake Darius before she had to. She lay still for 3 seconds, not resting, just loading, and then she was up, feet on the cold linoleum, moving through the dark apartment with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had long ago made peace with mornings. The kitchen was dim. She didn't turn on the overhead light. The overhead light flickered, and flickering lights cost money she hadn't budgeted for, and so she worked by the thin yellow glow from the stove clock. 5:49. She had 22 minutes. 2 egg biscuits from the foil-wrapped pack she bought on Sunday. 1 small OJ, the 4-ounce kind, meant for kids' lunches, which was the right size and the right price. 1 paper napkin, folded in thirds the way her mother had taught her to fold napkins, which was probably unnecessary, but felt like the least she could do. She tucked everything into a brown paper bag, folded the top down twice, and set it on the counter beside her keys. She stood there for a moment in the near dark, looking at the bag. She did this every morning, had done it for 14 months. She had never once thought of stopping. She wrote a note for Darius, left it under his water glass the way she always did, and she was out the door by 6:02. Riverside Walk in February was the kind of cold that came in from the river and settled low, wrapping around your ankles before climbing. Maya walked it with her chin tucked and her hands in the front pocket of her hoodie, the paper bag hanging from 2 fingers. The sky was just beginning to lighten at the edges, a gray going slowly purple, the kind of dawn that didn't commit. She saw the bench from 40 feet out. She always saw it from 40 feet out, and on it, the same as every morning, the shape of a man beneath a faded army green blanket, sitting upright now, which meant he had heard her coming. "Morning, Mr. Walt." "Miss Maya." His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had been somewhere and come back. He accepted the bag with both hands, the way you accept something that matters. "Cold one today. It'll break by Thursday." She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway. He set the bag on the bench beside him without opening it, the way he always did. Not until she left. She had noticed that months ago, and said nothing about it. She turned to go. "Same time tomorrow, Miss Maya?" She looked back. His eyes were steady and dark in the gray morning light. "Same time, Mr. Walt." She walked to Mercy General with 7 minutes to spare. She clocked in under the ceiling camera above the time clock, the one positioned at exactly the angle that let Donna Hartley review it from her office, and she felt, the way she always felt, clocking in the faint prickling awareness of being watched by someone who was hoping to find something wrong. She tied on her apron. She thought about Walter for exactly 1 more second, the way he held the bag, the way he never opened it until she was gone, and then the steam table was hot, and the line was starting, and there was no more room for anything that wasn't the next 6 hours. She didn't think about Marcus until she got home. She never did. She had learned over 3 years how to hold grief in a pocket she didn't open at work. But every morning at the bench, without knowing she was doing it, she opened it. Every morning at the bench, she was 26 years old again, standing outside a shelter in Cincinnati, handing a paper bag to a man with her husband's same careful hands. Marcus had been on that bench once. Somebody should have stopped. She stopped. That was all there was to it. She turned onto Creekside Drive at 4:22 p.m. and stopped walking. 2 men in army dress uniforms stood at the bottom of her apartment steps, green jackets with gold braid, garrison caps, the posture of men who had been trained to stand in exactly this way, in front of exactly these kinds of doors, with exactly this expression, formal, measured, careful not to show what they were carrying until they knew who they were handing it to. Maya's hands went cold. She knew what this looked like. She had lived with what this looked like for 3 years. Her whole body remembered. But Marcus was already gone. There was no one left for them to come about. She made herself walk forward. Across the street, Mrs. Okafor's curtain moved. Maya caught it from the corner of her eye, the slight shift of white fabric, the shadow of a woman behind it. Her neighbor had been on Creekside Drive for 11 years. She did not come outside for things like this, but she watched. She always watched. Somehow, that small fact steadied Maya's feet on the sidewalk. "Miss Calloway?" The taller officer had light brown eyes and spoke like someone who had practiced this sentence. "Maya Calloway?" "Yes, I'm Major Alan Pritchard. This is Sergeant First Class Webb. We're with the Reserve Affairs Office out of Wright-Patterson." He paused. "We're not here with bad news, ma'am. I want to say that first." She let out a breath. She hadn't known she was holding. "We're looking for you on behalf of a man named Walter Doss. General Walter A. Doss. Retired. He suffered a cardiac event 4 days ago. He's stable. He's been at Wright-Patterson Medical Center since Thursday. Before he lost consciousness in the ambulance, the first thing he said was, 'Your name.' The second thing was this address." Pritchard held her gaze steady. "He didn't give us much more than that, ma'am. Just your name and this address. He seemed to think you'd want to know." Maya stood very still on her own sidewalk. Walter, Mr. Walt, faded blanket, paper bag, both hands. "Same time tomorrow." "General," she said. The word felt like a door opening in a dark house. "Yes, ma'am. 3 wars, 41 years in service. Former Deputy Chief of Army Reserve, among other things." Pritchard's voice was careful and even. "We weren't sure you knew." She hadn't known. She hadn't known anything except that he was cold and quiet, and that he called her Miss Maya and never opened the bag until she left. She thanked the officers. She didn't remember doing it, but she must have, because they were nodding and handing her a card, and then they were gone. And she was standing in her apartment with her coat still on and a paper bag from that morning on the kitchen counter. She had forgotten to throw it out, and the stove clock reading 4:31. She sat down at the kitchen table. General Walter A. Doss. She thought about his hands. She had noticed his hands once, early on, how they didn't have the roughness you'd expect, how they were large and deliberate and still. She had thought at the time that he was maybe a retired teacher, a principal, maybe. Someone who'd spent his life being listened to in quiet rooms. She had not been entirely wrong. The bedroom door opened. Darius padded out in his socked feet, backpack still on, both straps fastened. He'd just gotten home from after school. He read her face the way he had been reading her face since he was 6 years old, with a patience that was too old for his body. "Mom?" She looked at him, his father's eyes, wide set and still. She didn't know how to explain what had just happened on their front steps. She didn't know how to explain any of it. Walter, the bench, 14 months. The fact that she had been handing breakfast to a general and calling him Mr. Walt, and not once asking for anything more. "Someone I know is in the hospital," she said finally. "He's okay, but he's in the hospital." Darius studied her for a long moment. "Is it Mr. Walt?" She stared at him. "How do you know his name?" Darius shifted his weight from one foot to the other, just slightly. His jaw moved the way it moved when he was deciding something. I heard you say it once," he said. She would remember later, much later, that was the first time her son had ever lied to her. And even then, it wasn't entirely a lie. He had heard her say it. He just hadn't heard it, only once. She let it go. She was too hollowed out to pull on threads tonight. She pulled off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. "We'll go see him tomorrow," she said. "You and me." She didn't ask herself why she said that. She already knew. Walter had woken up from a cardiac event, and the first words out of his mouth were her name and her address, and that meant she was the closest thing he had to someone. And she knew what it was to be someone's closest thing. She wasn't going to leave that unanswered. The bus to Wright-Patterson left at 7:40 a.m. Maya counted out $9 bills and counted them again, smoothing each one before feeding it into the fare machine. $9 round trip for 2 people. She had it. It was fine. She told herself it was fine, and she meant it, mostly. Darius sat beside her with his hands in his lap and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. watching the city thin out into highway, and the highway narrow into the long, flat approach to the base. He had his thinking face on, that absolute stillness that made teachers call her in for conferences until they realized that what they were seeing was not a problem. "Is he going to be okay?" Darius asked finally. "That's what we're going to find out." But the officer said he was stable. Stable means they've stopped the worst of it. She kept her eyes on the window. It doesn't always mean everything's fine. Darius was quiet for another mile. Then, "He's tough." She glanced at him. "You don't know him." Her son looked back at her with his father's patient eyes and said nothing. And Maya, for reasons she couldn't name yet, did not push. The ward was clean and fluorescent and smelled like every hospital she'd ever worked in, antiseptic and floor wax, and something beneath both of those, the warm, close smell of people healing. A nurse led them down a corridor to a room near the end of the hall, knocked twice, and opened the door. Walter was sitting up in bed. He was wearing a hospital gown the color of old pavement, and he had lost some of the outdoor solidity that belonged to him on the bench. Without the blanket, without the cold air, he looked like what he was, an old man who had been frightened by his own body 4 days ago and was still recalibrating, but his posture was straight. His gray beard was neat. His eyes, when they found Maya in the doorway, were exactly what they always were, steady, unhurried, watching. He looked at Darius for 1 second too long. "Miss Maya," he said. "Mr. Walt." She pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down, and Darius stood at the foot of the bed with his backpack on both straps, and for a moment nobody said anything, and that was all right. "You didn't have to come," Walter said. "You said my name in an ambulance." She folded her hands in her lap. "I figured that was an invitation." The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "I suppose it was." What came next arrived slowly, the way things arrive between people who are used to silence. Walter spoke about the bench in plain language, how it started after his wife Eleanor died 18 months ago, how his son had stopped speaking to him around the same time, how the grief wasn't the kind you could explain to people who lived in houses and had calendars and things to do on Tuesday, how one morning he simply needed to be somewhere nobody was expecting him to be, anyone. So he went to the bench, and he stayed. Maya listened without interrupting. Then she told him about Marcus. She told it the way she rarely told it, straight, without softening. How Marcus came home from his first deployment, changed in ways neither of them knew how to name. How the VA wait list stretched for months. How he spent 8 months in a shelter, and then 4 more on the street before she found him. How nobody brought him anything. How people looked at him and saw what wasn't there anymore, instead of what was. "I wasn't bringing breakfast for you, at first," she said. "Not really. I was bringing it for him, for the man he was when nobody stopped." She paused. "Then somewhere along the way, it became for you." Walter said nothing for a long moment. He looked at his hands, resting large and still on the hospital blanket. "He was a good man," Walter said quietly. Maya blinked. "You didn't know him." "No." He met her eyes. "But he raised you to do what you do. That tells me enough." She didn't have an answer for that. She didn't try to find one. On the bus ride home, Darius sat with his hands folded in his lap again and stared out the window at the highway coming back the other way. The late morning light made his profile look older than 11. He was doing the thing he did, going still and inward, turning something over in his mind that he wasn't ready to say out loud. Maya watched him from the corner of her eye and didn't push. But she noticed. She had learned, over years of being his mother, that when Darius went that quiet, it was never nothing. It was always something he was deciding how to carry. She just didn't know yet that he'd been carrying it for 6 months. Maya was at the kitchen table that evening with the bills spread out in front of her, not because she could fix them tonight, but because looking at them was the only way she knew how to feel in control. Utility, bus pass, the remaining balance on Marcus's hospital debt, which never seemed to get smaller no matter how many times she chipped at it. She had a system. She arranged everything by due date, then by amount. Then she made the decisions she could make and closed the folder on the ones she couldn't. She didn't hear Darius come out of his room. She only noticed him when he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She looked up. He had his backpack off, finally, and his hands were folded on the table the way she folded her hands when she was about to say something she'd been holding for a long time. He had his father's jaw. The set of it, right now, was all Marcus. "I have to tell you something," he said. She closed the folder. He told her in the way he did most things, quietly, directly, without decoration. For the past 6 months, on Saturday mornings while she thought he was at the library or riding his bike in the park, he had been walking to Riverside Walk. He had followed her one morning out of curiosity, staying far enough back that she didn't see him. He had watched her leave the bag. He had watched Walter take it. And after she left, he had walked up to the bench himself and said hello. Maya sat very still. Walter, Darius said, had not been surprised, or if he had been, he didn't show it. He just made room on the bench, the way you make room for someone you were expecting. The first thing Walter taught him was how to fold an American flag. Proper military folds, crisp and deliberate, each triangle precise. Then chess, then history. Not the kind from textbooks, but the kind Walter had lived through, which was different. He taught Darius to sit still and think before he acted, to watch a situation the way you watch a chessboard. All of it, not just the piece you wanted to move. "He told me my dad would have been proud of me," Darius said. I don't know how he knew anything about Dad, but it didn't feel like a lie. Maya's chest tightened so fast, it almost took her breath. She thought about her son, 11 years old, walking alone to a bench on a cold Saturday morning because he had seen something in an old man that he recognized. She thought about what he must have recognized. She thought about the photograph on the refrigerator. Marcus in his uniform, quiet and composed, the kind of man who knew how to be still in a room. She didn't cry. She held it back the way she held most things back, carefully, behind her sternum, where Darius couldn't see. She didn't punish him. She didn't even consider it. "What else did he talk about?" she asked. Darius looked at her for a moment, measuring something. "He talked about making mistakes you can't undo," he said, "and how the only thing to do after that is show up anyway." Maya nodded slowly. She reached across the table and covered his folded hands with hers for just a moment. Then she sat back and let out a long breath. "Go to bed," she said. "I'm going back to see him tomorrow." She waited until she heard his door close. Then she sat alone in the kitchen with the bill folder and the stove clock light and the particular silence of an apartment where a child is sleeping, and she let herself feel the full weight of what her son had just told her. He had found his way to the bench because he needed something she didn't know how to give him. And Walter had known. He had known from the moment that Boy walked up and said hello. Tomorrow she was going to ask him about that. She came back the next day without Darius. Just Maya and the 7:40 bus and $9 in her coat pocket and a head full of questions she hadn't yet decided how to ask. Walter was sitting up when she arrived, a little more color in his face than the day before. He watched her pull the chair close with the expression of a man who had read rooms for 40 years and already knew the temperature of this one. "You talked to the boy," he said. "He talked to me." She sat down. "There's a difference." Walter allowed that with a small nod. She asked him about his career first, not because she wanted to ease into it, but because she needed to understand who she was actually sitting across from. He answered plainly, without performance. 3 wars, 41 years. The particular loneliness, he said, of spending your life in institutions that train you to endure rather than feel, and then arriving at the end of it without the language to explain what that cost. He talked about Derek, his son, now a congressman-elect out of Virginia, who had not returned a call in 6 years. The argument that started it had been about politics, technically, but arguments that calcify into 6 years of silence are never really about what they start with. They are about everything that came before, every dinner table Derek sat at alone, every school event Walter missed, every time the institution came first and the family came second, until Derek stopped expecting any different. "He's not wrong," Walter said quietly. "That's the thing. He's not wrong about any of it." Maya looked at him. "Have you told him that?" "I left a message once." He paused. "I said the wrong things in the right order. That's not the same as saying them." She let that sit for a moment. Then she asked what she actually came to ask. She asked how he knew about Marcus. Walter was quiet for a beat. Then he told her. Before Riverside Walk, He had spent a few months at a veterans outreach shelter a few miles away, not staying, just volunteering, the way he needed to be useful before grief turned him all the way inward. A counselor there had mentioned Marcus, not by name at first, but by circumstance, a veteran who had struggled, who had been unhoused, whose family was still in Dayton. Walter had asked a few careful questions. He had learned enough. When he found the bench, he had already known that Maya walked past it. He had not manufactured the encounter, but he had not moved benches, either. Maya let that land fully. She turned it over, grateful and unsettled at the same time, and both feelings were real, and neither one canceled the other. "I wasn't replacing his father," Walter said. His voice was measured and direct. "I was just making sure somebody was paying attention." She looked at him for a long moment, the steady brown eyes, the careful hands on the blanket. "You could have just told me," she said. "You would have stopped coming." She didn't answer that, because he wasn't wrong. She stayed another 40 minutes. She talked about Darius's chess, and about a good week at work, and about the walk along Riverside Walk that morning, which had felt strange without the bag. Normal things, safe things, the kind of conversation that was really just two people agreeing to keep showing up. When she left, Walter reached for the phone on his bedside table. She didn't see him dial. She was already in the hallway, already thinking about the bus fare, already adding up the week's math in the back of her mind, the way she always did. She didn't know he was making the two most important phone calls of both their lives. Monday morning came the way Monday mornings always came, too fast and too cold. Maya clocked in at 6:58 a.m. and went straight to the schedule board. She looked at it once, looked again. 6 hours gone. Her Tuesday double, reduced. Her Thursday closing shift, reassigned. She ran the numbers standing right there in the break room, coat still on, lunch bag in her hand. 6 hours at her hourly rate. She felt it in her stomach before she finished the math. Donna Hartley was already in her glass-walled office, lanyards swaying as she moved behind her desk, helmet of highlighted hair perfectly in place. She did not look up when Maya walked past. She didn't need to. The schedule board had already spoken for her. The newer hire, Brianna, who had started in November and who had brought Donna a birthday card with a gift card inside, which everyone on the floor had noticed, was working Maya's Thursday close. Brianna was fine. She was perfectly fine. That wasn't the point. The point was that Donna ran the schedule the way a landlord runs a bad building, not to keep things functioning, but to remind everyone who held the keys. Maya tied her apron and went to work. She did not knock on Donna's office door. She did not ask for an explanation. She had learned over 2 years at Mercy General that asking Donna for explanations only gave Donna more to say. She did the math at lunch on a paper napkin, sitting alone at the end of the break room table. 6 hours cut. February paycheck, approximately $1,840 after taxes. March rent was $1,650. After the 2 bounce check fees from last month, $35 each, and the bus fare for the hospital visits, she was looking at a gap of roughly $2,200 before the month was done. She folded the napkin and put it in her pocket. After her shift, she took the bus to Wright-Patterson. She walked into Walter's room with a small bag of peanut butter crackers from the vending machine in the lobby, the closest thing to a gift she could manage that day. And she sat down and talked about Darius. Darius had beaten her at chess last night for the first time. She hadn't let him win. He'd genuinely outmaneuvered her, taken her queen in 6 moves, and then looked up with an expression of careful restraint that was, she told Walter, unmistakably his father's face. Walter smiled. A real one. Slow and wide. She talked about the chess and about Darius's tournament coming up in spring, and about a funny thing that happened on the bus that morning. She did not mention the schedule board. She did not mention the napkin in her pocket. She did not mention the $2,200. Walter listened. He watched her face the way he had spent 40 years watching faces, tracking the thing beneath the thing, reading the tension that lives in the shoulders and the jaw, and the careful timing of a breath. "How are things at home?" he asked. She met his eyes, kept her face easy. "Fine, Mr. Walt. Same as always." He nodded slowly. The nod that meant he knew she was lying. She looked away first. Outside the window, the sky was going gray and heavy, the way it did in Dayton in February when it was deciding whether to snow. She didn't know what Walter knew. She didn't know what he was carrying on her behalf in the private accounting of that quiet, watchful mind. She just knew she had to figure out what to tell Darius when she got home. And that was the part she had been putting off all day. She waited until Darius had been in bed for 20 minutes before she knocked on his door. She sat on the edge of his mattress, the way she had done since he was small. Not hovering, just close. The nightlight on his dresser made the room amber and warm. He was awake. He was always awake when she came in like this. He had inherited her inability to sleep when something was unresolved. She told him plainly. If things didn't change by the end of March, they would need to look at other options. Maybe her cousin Renee's place in Columbus. Just for a little while. Just until she could get things level again. She kept her voice steady. Matter of fact, the way you tell a child hard things when you want them to know that hard things can be survived. Darius was quiet for a long moment. He didn't cry. He looked at the ceiling with his father's wide-set eyes, and he turned it over, the way he turned everything over, carefully, from all sides. Then he asked one question. What about Mr. Walt? Maya's chest cracked open. Just for a second. She closed it back before he could see. We'd still visit, she said. Columbus isn't far. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. That one question had already said everything. That in the accounting of what they might lose, the old man 6 bus stops away had made the list right alongside their home. She kissed his forehead. She turned out the light. At the kitchen table, she opened the folder. All of it laid out again. The numbers she already knew, but needed to look at, because looking was the only power she had left over them. $18,000 in debt from Marcus's hospital bills, and the funeral costs, and the 2 months of missed rent in the year after he died, when she couldn't get out of bed fast enough. $70 in bounced check fees, $54 in bus fare over 6 hospital visits, February paycheck at $1,140. She made the list of things she could cut. She got to the egg biscuit supplies, the foil pack, the 4-ounce OJ, the napkins. She stared at the line for a long moment. She didn't cut them. She closed the folder and went to bed. The next morning, she packed the bag and rode the bus to Wright-Patterson instead of walking Riverside Walk. She had never brought the breakfast to the hospital before. It felt strange, carrying it through the corridor, past the nurse's station, into Walter's room. She set it on his tray table. He looked at it, then at her. You moved the bench, he said. She felt something loosen in her chest, a small warmth she hadn't expected. You moved first, she said. He smiled at that, a real one, and for a few minutes, everything that was impossible about her February felt, if not smaller, then at least not the only thing in the room. 3 weeks passed. Walter healed, and while he healed, he was very quietly doing something none of them knew about yet. The nurse left at 9:15. Walter waited until her footsteps faded down the corridor. Then he sat up straighter in the hospital bed, reached for the phone on the bedside table, and dialed from memory. It rang twice. The man who answered had a brisk, professional voice, the voice of someone who spent his days moving between meetings. But when he heard Walter's name, the briskness softened into something older. General Doss, a pause. It's been a long time, sir. It has. Walter kept his voice measured and even, the way he kept it in every room where the outcome mattered. You're still at Wright-Patterson staffing, civilian division. Going on 9 years now. Good. Walter paused just long enough to make what came next land with appropriate weight. I need you to look into something for me. A position in Nutrition Services Administration. And I need you to look into a benefits backlog, survivor's claim, veteran's family, name of Calloway, Marcus Calloway, Dayton, Ohio. He passed 3 years ago. Another pause. I have reason to believe the claim was never properly filed. I need someone who knows where to look and who to ask. The man on the other end was quiet for a moment. I can look into both, he said. I know you can, Walter said. That's why I called you. He thanked him. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a full minute after, looking at the window, at the flat gray February sky above the tree line. Then he dialed again. This number he had not dialed in 6 years. He knew it still, because he was the kind of man who never forgot a number he had ever needed. He had needed this one every day for 6 years, and never dialed it. He dialed it now. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. Derek's voice, polished, measured, a public voice. The voice of a man who had learned early that presentation was armor. Walter waited for the tone. Derek. He stopped. Started again. I'm not calling to argue. I'm not calling to apologize on a voicemail either. You deserve better than that, and so do I. He paused. I'm calling because there is a woman in Dayton, Ohio, who brought me breakfast every morning for 14 months when she thought I was nobody, and a boy 11 years old who walked up to me on a bench alone one Saturday because he recognized something in me that I didn't know I still had. Walter's jaw tightened. He held it steady. I'm not asking you to forgive me on the phone, Derek. I'm asking you to come see what forgiveness looks like when it costs somebody something. There's a woman in Dayton who can show you. I think you need to see it. He hung up. He set the phone on the tray table beside the paper bag Maya had brought that morning. Bag already open now, biscuits gone, the folded napkin the only thing left inside. He picked up the napkin, turned it over in his large, careful hands. Outside, the gray sky had started to lighten, just at the edges, the way it did when it was finally deciding to change. 2 weeks later, Walter was discharged. Maya and Darius were in the lobby when he came down the elevator in his street clothes. No hospital gown, no blanket, just an old man in a clean flannel shirt with his gray beard neatly kept and his posture straight. Darius handed him a paper bag for the ride. Walter took it with both hands. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Same time tomorrow, Darius said. Walter's eyes creased at the corners. He didn't answer, but he remembered. He did not go back to the bench. He moved into a small furnished apartment 6 blocks from Creekside Drive, and the bench on Riverside Walk sat empty in the February cold, and 6 weeks after the officers appeared at Maya's door, something arrived in the mail that changed the shape of everything. Darius saw it first. He had gotten home from school before Maya, pulled the mail from the box the way she'd taught him, separated the bills from the junk from anything that looked different. He knew which was which. He'd been doing it since he was 9. This one looked different. Hand-addressed in careful block print. No return label. A slight thickness to it. Not just a letter. He set it on the counter and sat at the kitchen table and looked at it until he heard his mother's key in the lock. Maya came in still in her work clothes, bag on her shoulder, the particular quiet exhaustion of a woman at the end of a long shift. She saw Darius's face first, then the envelope. She set down her bag. She picked it up, looked at her own name in that careful block print. She opened it. Inside was a certified check and a small handwritten card. She read the card first. It said, "For 14 months of egg biscuits and the dignity you gave a man who thought he'd forfeited his bind. In full, Walter A. Doss." Then she looked at the check. $47,000. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Not in a chair. On the floor, with her back against the cabinets, because her legs simply stopped working, and the floor was where she ended up. The check in one hand, the card in the other. Darius sat down next to her without being asked. He didn't say anything. He looked at the check. He looked at her face. She called Walter. He answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting. He explained the amount in 2 parts, in the plain and measured voice of a man who had already done all the math and needed her to simply receive it. $3,900 represented every breakfast, 14 months at roughly $9.18 per day, which he had tracked in a small notebook from the first morning. He had kept a log. She closed her eyes. The remaining $43,100 was different. It was not his money. It was Marcus's. VA survivor benefits, a claim that had never been properly filed after Marcus died, lost somewhere in a system that was very good at waiting for no one to ask the right question. Walter's former adjutant had found it, had filed it correctly, had recovered every dollar owed to Maya and Darius from the day Marcus passed. The money had been sitting in a government system for 3 years, waiting. It had always belonged to them. Maya was silent for so long that Walter said her name, gently, to make sure she was still there. "The biscuit money is from me," he said quietly. "The rest was Marcus's. It was sitting in a system that was waiting for someone to ask the right question. I just knew who to ask. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She did not cry. She held it, the way she held everything, until it became something she could carry. Beside her, Darius looked at the check for another moment. Then he said, "Mom, that's Dad's." "I know," she said. "He would have hated that it took this long." "Yeah," she said, "he would have." She held the card in her hand for a long time after she hung up. "For 14 months of egg biscuits and the dignity you gave a man who thought he'd forfeited his." She thought about Marcus on the bench. She thought about all the mornings nobody stopped. Then she thought about what was coming next. Because the following week, something else arrived in Dayton. Something none of them had quite prepared for. Walter's son was on his way. Derek Doss had driven from Columbus that morning in civilian clothes. No aide, no advance staff, no one who knew where he was going or why. Just a man in a good charcoal coat and a rental car, sitting in a plastic chair in Wright-Patterson's hospital common room, staring at his own hands. He was his father's height. He had his father's jaw. But where Walter carried stillness like a natural condition, Derek carried it like something he had built deliberately, brick by brick, over years of needing to appear unaffected. Right now, it wasn't working. He had read about Riverside Walk on the drive over, a public park bench, 14 months, an 11-year-old boy who walked there alone on Saturday mornings to learn how to fold a flag. He had pulled over twice before he could keep driving. Walter was already in the room when Derek came through the door. Sitting straight in the chair by the window, gray beard neat, hands folded on the table. Neutral ground, Walter had said on the phone. A common room, not his apartment, not a restaurant, just a table and 2 chairs, and the particular quality of light that comes through hospital windows in the middle of the afternoon. Derek sat down across from him. They looked at each other for the first time in 6 years. Whatever Derek had expected, a diminished man, a frail one, someone hollowed out by grief and a bench in the cold, that was not what he found. He found his father. Older, yes, quieter, but present in the full, deliberate way Walter had always been present when it mattered. Walter told him about Maya without dressing it up. The bench, the paper bag. Every morning for 14 months, before a double shift, from a woman earning $31,000 a year with $18,000 in debt and a son to raise. He told him about Darius, how the boy had walked up alone one Saturday and sat down, and how they had spent 6 months together on that bench, talking about chess and history, and how to sit still long enough to see things clearly. Derek listened. He held his jaw the way Walter held his jaw. He didn't speak. Walter stopped talking. The silence stretched between them. Then Derek said, "You let strangers take care of you, and you couldn't call me." The words came out tight and controlled, but underneath them was everything. 6 years of it, a whole childhood's worth stacked behind those 12 words. Walter held his son's gaze. He didn't look away. He didn't defend. "She wasn't a stranger," he said quietly. "She was just someone who showed up." A pause, long enough to mean something. "I didn't know how to ask you to do that. I should have. That's on me." Derek looked at the table. 1 second, 2, 4. When he looked up, something in his face had shifted. Not repaired, not resolved, but cracked open just enough for air to get in. His jaw unclenched by a fraction. Just a fraction. "I need time," he said. "I know," Walter said. They left the hospital together. Not side by side, not quite, but through the same door, in the same direction, which for 2 men like them was the beginning of something. What Derek did with that beginning, in the days that followed, was more than either of them had dared to expect. Maya spent the bus ride to Mercy General, preparing to be professional. She had gotten a call the afternoon before from a woman in the hospital's administrative wing, not Donna, not anyone from the cafeteria floor, but an administrator named Carol Simmons, whose name Maya had never heard. The message said to come in an hour before her shift and ask for the 3rd floor conference room. Maya had spent the rest of the evening running through every possible version of what that meant. An HR complaint from Donna, a review she hadn't been told about, something she'd done wrong, that she couldn't identify, which was the worst kind, the nameless kind, the kind you couldn't prepare for. She got off the bus with her chin up and her hands steady, and she rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, and she knocked on the conference room door, and she sat down across from Carol Simmons, who had kind eyes and a folder open in front of her, and she waited. It was not about Donna. Carol Simmons was the Director of Nutrition Services Administration. The position she described, Nutrition Services Coordinator, full-time, benefits included, had not formally existed 2 weeks ago. It had been created in response to a staffing review that identified a gap in administrative support for the department. The salary was $52,000 a year. Maya sat very still. She said, "I don't have an administrative degree." Carol said the position requires demonstrated operational experience and enrollment in a qualifying program within the first year. "We're aware of your work history here. We believe you're qualified." Maya looked at the folder. She looked at the number on the page. She thought about the napkin in her coat pocket from 3 weeks ago, the math she'd done at the break room table, the $2,200 gap that had kept her awake 4 nights in a row. She said she would need a day to consider it. She walked out of the hospital and stood in the parking lot in the February cold and called Walter. He answered on the 2nd ring. "You did this," she said. Not angry, just clear. "I made a phone call," he said. "Walter, the position was a real gap, Maya. I just made sure the right person was looking at the right resume." A brief pause. "You've been running that cafeteria floor for 2 years. Everyone who works there knows it. I just said it out loud to someone with a budget." She pressed her free hand flat against the cold brick wall of the building and took a breath. "The debt," she said. "The $18,000. Veterans Family Relief Fund. Derek's office identified an applicable program. The paperwork was filed last week." She closed her eyes. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say she hadn't earned it, that she hadn't asked for any of it, that taking felt different from receiving, and she wasn't sure she knew how to do the second one. She had been giving for so long, 3 years, longer, her whole adult life, maybe. "You earned it 14 months ago," Walter said. His voice was quiet and final. "I've just been slow with the paperwork." She stood in the cold parking lot for a long time after she hung up, long enough for her hands to go numb, long enough to feel somewhere underneath the disbelief something she hadn't felt in years. Safe, not fixed, not rescued, just safe. Like the ground beneath her feet had stopped shifting. Finally, after so long she'd forgotten what still felt like. She went back inside. She accepted the position. She did not let herself cry until she was in the elevator, alone, going back down to the floor where she had spent 2 years being quietly excellent for a woman who never once said so. The elevator doors opened. She walked out. She went to work. And 1 year later, the world looked almost nothing like it had. The badge said Nutrition Services Coordinator. Maya clipped it to her lanyard every morning now, a different lanyard from Donna's, plain and black, with none of the extra badges that announced their own importance. Just her name, just her title. She had been wearing it for 11 months, and she still felt a small, quiet thing in her chest every time she looked at it. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of being seen accurately. At last. She was 3 months from finishing her associate's degree in healthcare administration. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, online, after Darius was in bed. She had not missed a session. On a Tuesday morning in late February, almost exactly 1 year since 2 officers had stood on her front steps, Maya walked through Mercy General's main corridor on her way to a 9 o'clock meeting and saw Donna Hartley coming the other way. She saw the banker's box first. Cardboard, slightly overfull, a lanyard draped over one flap. Then the HR representative walking beside her, a young woman named Priya, whose expression was professionally neutral in the particular way it gets when the outcome has already been decided. Then Donna herself. Helmet of highlighted hair, shoes 1 grade too expensive, everything in its usual place. Except none of it fit. Now. Without the schedule board behind her and the glass-walled office and the small machinery of institutional power she had spent years operating, Donna Hartley was just a compact woman carrying a box. An internal review had turned up a documented pattern of retaliatory scheduling against 3 employees, Maya among them. The outcome was proportional and procedural. Inventory management, basement supply wing, effective immediately. Maya knew all of this. She had been quietly informed the week before. So when their eyes met in the corridor, just for a second, just the two of them, the length of a hallway between them, Maya didn't slow down. She didn't stop. She didn't say a single word. Donna looked away first. Maya kept walking. That afternoon, Walter came to Darius's middle school chess tournament. He sat in the third row of the gymnasium bleachers in his good flannel shirt, straight-backed and attentive, watching Darius navigate the bracket with the same focused patience he'd been watching that boy develop for over a year now. Darius placed second. Afterward, walking to the bus stop, Darius told Walter he had let his opponent win the endgame on purpose to see if the boy would notice. Walter looked at him. "Did he?" he said. "No," Darius said. "Good," Walter said. "You were teaching, not competing." Darius thought about that for a moment. The way he thought about everything Walter said, turning it over, finding its edges. Then he nodded once and shifted his chessboard under his arm. Walter watched him. He thought about a bench, about an 11-year-old boy who had walked up alone one Saturday morning and sat down without being invited, because he had recognized something. Walter hadn't been sure, in those early months, what he still had to offer. He was sure now. On Sunday, Derek called at noon, the way he had every Sunday for the past 6 months. The calls were not easy, not yet, not fully, but they were scheduled, and for two men like them, that was the same as a promise. Walter picked up on the first ring. He always picked up on the first ring now. And the following week, he sat down with Maya at a law office on 5th Street, a document on the table between them, and asked her to help him build something that would outlast them both. The law office on 5th Street was small and smelled like old carpet and coffee, the kind of place where serious things got done without any ceremony about it. A round table, 4 chairs, a window looking out onto a parking lot. Walter was already seated when Maya arrived. A document in front of him and a pen laid across the top of it like a question waiting to be asked. She sat down across from him. She looked at the document. She looked at him. "Read it first," he said. She read it. The Marcus Calloway Veterans Family Education Fund, seeded with $2.3 million from the estate of Walter A. Doss, structured to provide education grants for children of veterans facing financial hardship. Annual grants of $5,000 per recipient, with a goal of 20 families in the first year. Board of Directors, 3 members, 1 seat currently vacant, 1 seat held by Walter, 1 seat offered to Maya Renee Calloway. She read her husband's name at the top of the page twice. Her throat tightened. She held it. "You named it for him," she said. "He got to the bench first," Walter said. "He just couldn't stay." She pressed her lips together, looked at the window, the parking lot. A gray February sky, not so different from the one a year ago when 2 officers stood on her front steps and her hands went cold. She looked back at Walter. "You could have named it anything," she said. "You could have named it for Eleanor, for yourself." "Eleanor has a garden at Fort Myer named for her," Walter said. Matter of fact, the way he was matter of fact about most things that mattered to him. "Marcus has a fund. I think he got the better end of it." Maya laughed, a real one, short and sudden, and a little wet at the edges. She covered her mouth with her hand. Walter watched her with the steady, patient expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for this particular laugh. She picked up the pen. She signed her name in the space provided, and her handwriting was careful and clear, the same way she did everything without flourish, without waste, just the thing itself done correctly. The lawyer witnessed it, shook both their hands, said something professional and forgettable. They let themselves out into the parking lot and stood for a moment in the cold air without speaking. Across the country, in a congressional office in Washington, D.C., Derek Doss was introducing co-sponsorship language for a federal bill that mirrored the fund's mission at national scale: education grants for children of veterans in financial hardship, systematized, funded, built to last. Walter had watched the press conference announcement via video call from his apartment 6 blocks from Creekside Drive, sitting in the chair by his window with his coffee going cold in his hand, his jaw set in the way it set when he was keeping something in. He had not told Maya about the legislation until it was filed. When she found out, she had called him and said Walter, just that, just his name, with everything in it. He had said, Marcus deserved someone who would be taken care of. Both of you did. I just had more time than most people to do something about it. Now, standing in the parking lot, Maya zipped her coat against the cold. She had a meeting in 40 minutes, a class at 7. Darius had chess practice after school, and she needed to start dinner by 6:30, and the associate's degree was 3 months away, and the fund would hold its first board meeting in April, and there were 20 families out there she hadn't met yet whose children were going to get something that Darius almost didn't get. Room. Just room. Room to stay still long enough to become who they were meant to be. She said goodbye to Walter. She walked to the bus stop. She did not look back because she was already thinking forward, the way she had always thought, into the next hour, the next day, the next thing that needed doing. She did not know that the next morning she would pack a paper bag out of habit and walk somewhere she hadn't walked in a long time. She found out when her alarm went off. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. Maya silenced it before the second buzz. The same reflex, the same dark apartment, same stove clock light, same cold linoleum under her feet. Some things don't change when your life does. The body keeps its habits. The hands remember. She stood in the kitchen, and she packed the bag without deciding to. 2 egg biscuits from the foil pack, 1 small OJ, 1 paper napkin, folded in thirds. She folded the top of the bag down twice and picked up her keys. She left a note for Darius under his water glass. Outside, the cold hit her, the way February cold always hit her, low and persistent, coming up from the ground. She walked with her chin tucked and her hands in her pocket, and the paper bag hanging from 2 fingers, the way she had walked for 14 months before everything changed, and then kept walking after. Riverside Walk was quiet and pale in the early light. The river moved slow and gray in the distance. Her breath made small clouds ahead of her that dissolved before she reached them. She saw the bench from 40 feet out. It was empty. Of course it was empty. Walter was 6 blocks away in a small furnished apartment, making coffee in his flannel shirt, picking up the phone at noon on Sundays, teaching a 12-year-old boy that first place is overrated and paying attention is not. He was not on the bench. He would not be on the bench again. She walked up to it anyway. She set the paper bag down. She straightened the top fold. She stood there for a moment with her hands at her sides, looking at the empty bench in the early morning cold, and she let herself feel the full, unguarded weight of everything that bench had held. Marcus, 8 months on a street somewhere while the world walked past him. A young woman who stopped. A marriage built from that stopping, and a son with wide-set eyes, and a debt she had been carrying for 3 years that turned out to have always been someone else's obligation. A system's debt, long overdue. Walter, a general under a faded blanket who held a paper bag with both hands and never opened it until she left, because he understood, without being told, that some kindnesses need to be private to stay clean. Darius, 12 years old now, backpack on both straps, chessboard under his arm, carrying Walter's lessons, the way his mother carried Marcus's memory, not as weight, but as instruction, and herself. Maya Calloway, 38, Nutrition Services Coordinator, 3 months from a degree she would finish, a board she would serve, 20 families she would help, and then 20 more the year after that. A woman who had spent 3 years outrunning collapse, and somewhere along the way, without planning it, without looking up long enough to notice, had stopped running. Not because the danger had passed, because she had finally stopped being alone in it. She picked up her bag, not the paper bag that stayed, her work bag, her keys, her badge on its plain black lanyard. She walked toward Mercy General. Across the street, behind a curtain on Creekside Drive, Mrs. Okafor watched her go, the way she had always watched, quietly, from a window, with the particular understanding of a woman who knew that some things don't need to be named to be honored. She had seen the officers arrive a year ago. She had seen the envelope. She had seen Maya leave for work the next morning, with the same walk, the same chin, the same unhurried purpose. She let the curtain fall. She went to make her tea. 6 blocks away, Walter poured his coffee and looked out his window at the lightening sky, and thought about a bench and a paper bag, and a woman who had given him back the only thing he had actually lost. Not rank, not status, not the house on the good street. just the sense that being present still mattered, that showing up for someone was enough, that the smallest, most ordinary acts of decency were the ones that lasted. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about Derek. He thought about a boy learning to fold a flag on a cold Saturday morning because he had recognized something in an old man's quiet that reminded him of a photograph on a refrigerator. He picked up the phone and dialed. Darius answered on the third ring, voice still thick with sleep. "School's not for 2 hours," he said. "I know," Walter said. "I just wanted to say good morning." A pause. Then, in the plain and unhurried voice of a boy who had learned patience from the best of people, "Good morning, Mr. Walt." Walter smiled, a real one. Outside, the sun came up over Dayton, Ohio. Slow and wide and deliberate, the way good things come, not all at once, but steadily and certain. Maya Calloway clocked in at 6:58 a.m. The badge said coordinator. The desk that used to be Donna's was occupied now by a young man who said good morning when he meant it. The cafeteria floor hummed with the first sounds of the day. She tied on her lanyard. She thought about the bench for one more second. The empty bench, the paper bag sitting on it in the cold, the folded napkin inside, the habit that had started as grief and become something else entirely. Something she didn't have a word for, exactly, except that it was the same thing Marcus had given her when she was 26, and he was a man on a bench, and she was a woman who stopped. She never set out to save anyone. She just decided, 14 months before anyone was watching, that no one should have to eat alone. That decision saved her too,